Hi and welcome to another episode of Aurora School for Artists Digital. I'm Christoph and today I want to show you how to create your own smartphone app in Unity and install it on your smartphone. To do this, we'll look at the settings you need to be aware of to make sure everything runs smoothly, how the process works step by step, and how it looks in the end for Android and iOS. First, we open the Unity Hub. And here you have the option to create either a new project. We've already explained this in another video, or you can use an existing project. I have created a project named Smartphone Application for this tutorial. I will open it now, but before we do that, I will check again if I have installed the correct components for the Unity version in which I want to open the project. And for that, I go to Installs. And this is the Unity version, the LTS version. And on this Windows computer, I cannot make an iOS build. But for Android, I have installed the necessary Android build support for the corresponding Unity version. If you don't have that, you could click on the three dots and click on Add Modules to install the corresponding Android support by checking the boxes and then clicking on Done. Then it should work accordingly. I already have it, so I don't need to do it and can open my application or my project. The project is open, and I want to briefly show you what's happening here. Not much. I created a very small project because this tutorial is not about the project itself. But I'll briefly show you what happens when you press the play button. This should be visible on our smartphone screen later. So, a red cube moving around a blue sphere. This goes on continuously. Nothing else happens. Exciting. And that's what we're trying to get on the smartphone screen now. The default build settings of the Unity editor are, for the platform where Unity is currently installed, means if we were to build this project as an application now, compile it, then a Windows application would be created for me. And to change that, we can click on File in the upper left corner and then on Build Settings. And here we see that the platform is PC, Mac, Linux standalone is selected, which means an application for the corresponding computer platform will be created. And we have now installed the Android build support for this Unity version. That means we have the option to switch the platform here. For all other platforms, it is not installed. You get a notice that you need to install a tool for it. We can simply switch the platform to Android. This takes a short moment, depending on the project size. For this small project, it's relatively quick, but don't be surprised if it takes a little longer for you. In the end, you'll see, for example, that the shadow quality goes down a bit. This is standard on Android, because the computing power on smartphones is not as good as on computers, or at least it's not expected to be. The various settings. Next, we want to look at you have for the platforms, and for that, click on Edit, Project Settings, and then a Project Settings window appears. I have docked it next to the game window. And depending on which tab you are on here, you have different instance options. For us, it is interesting, the player, and by that, I don't mean the player playing the application, but the smartphone, to be understood as a movie player on which the application runs. And here you have different settings for various devices. For us, the Android settings are interesting here, and you can switch between the platforms using the tabs. The tab should now be on the Android symbol here. And, for example, you get the table sharing settings. You can set specific things for your release. And particularly interesting for us are the also settings, because here you have the option to set the Android version on which your application should run. Here the minimum is meant, so on which lowest version should your application definitely run. You can also choose the Android 8 version here. This covers most of the markets used and available phones. You have the option here at the top, cross-platform, to enter your name or your company's name, the name of the application or the app on the phone. You also have the chance to choose an icon for your app, so which icon should be displayed on the home screen or in the App Store. I'll leave everything on the default settings for now. What might be interesting are the quality settings. As mentioned, the shadow quality has gone down here. If you want to change that, you have the option under quality to set the settings so that they achieve good shadow quality on Android as well. You have to consider that it should work performance-wise. But here you have the option to click through to see how the shadow quality looks each time. For example, in medium, you can clearly see the edges of the shadows at these corners. And if you set it to very high, they are somewhat rounder. Then you need to change the default for the Android platform. And we can set it to very high or even ultra, for example, and then you achieve a better shadow quality accordingly. Before we create our application, we'll briefly check again whether we have really installed all the necessary components. And for that, we go to Edit Preferences and look here under External Tools to see if all the necessary components for Android are installed or linked. You need to create the APK, the app package for Android, both the JDK and the Android SDK, the NDK and Gradle. You don't have to install it with the Unity installation. It can be done through the Unity Hub. You can also download the components individually from the internet and link them here accordingly. Depending on the version, you might need a different tool or a different tool version. And if you set it correctly, it will work accordingly. My tip for beginners, install it through the Unity Hub, and then the build should work. So now we can start our first build attempt by clicking Build here. I haven't connected an Android device yet. We'll do that in a moment, but first, we simply create an app build by clicking Build in our build settings. And I create a new folder called Builds. And in this folder, I save this APK, the Android application. And I'll call it Test 1. Click Save, and now the creation of the Android application begins. This takes a short moment. Once the build is complete, we get an APK file in our Builds folder. For me, it's called Test 1, and we need to copy this file to our Android smartphone and install it there. But first, we need to do some things on our Android smartphone. For better understanding, I have transmitted my Android screen so you can see what settings I'm making. And with Android, you need to first enable developer mode to install an app on your phone. For that, you need to go to Settings, to the About Phone tab, or Info, or whatever it might be called on your device. It depends on how your Android version is set up. For me, it's under About Phone, and we're interested in the Android version, where it says version number 12 for me. And you need to click on this version number 5 times. If you're doing this for the first time, after clicking 5 times, the developer mode for your phone will be enabled, and you need this to see the developer settings. I will now search for developer options. And if you scroll down a bit here, you'll find under debugging the options to install via USB and certain security settings. Enable all of these. This allows you to install APKs that you transfer to your phone and also directly install from Unity. When these settings are all enabled, for me, I need to create an account with the smartphone manufacturer, for example. You may need to do this as well. When they are set up, we can continue. I will now navigate on the computer to the appropriate location where my smartphone is. For me, it's this Mi 9T Pro, and on the internal storage, I created a folder named Development. And in that, I copy the Test 1 app. And once I've done that, I can open the file manager on my phone. Go to APKs and find the Test 1 APK. And install it by clicking on it. This takes a short moment. Then I open it, and I can already see my sphere and the red cube rotating around it. Now, in landscape format, it might be easier to see. And we have our Android app installed on our smartphone. That's one way. Let's look at another way. With the developer settings enabled, you can also directly from Unity build and run an application for Android without the need to copy the app to the smartphone manually. I can now simply click on Build and Run here, and then Unity will again ask if we want to give a new name to the application, Test 2. And now, Unity searches for a connected Android device and then creates a new app, installing it automatically on the smartphone. You should unlock your smartphone and then it will show installing app on device and on your smartphone. You usually get another prompt asking if you allow it to install the app. Now it's slowly installing this APK. I'll just start it again and override it. And you need to allow Android to install the app on your smartphone. You can also select Remember this device. This will ensure that in the future, you don't need to do this step again, and it will work automatically. And when that's done, you will see that the installation is complete, and your application should start directly on your smartphone. This installation method is much quicker than manually copying the app to the smartphone each time. So, now that it worked for Android, let's see how we can create an app for an iPad or iOS and install it there. First, I switched to a Mac computer because, as explained at the beginning, you can't create iOS apps with a Windows computer, but you need a Mac computer with Xcode installed. Also, let's briefly check in the Unity Hub if we have the necessary iOS build support package installed for my older version. If not, as with Windows and Android, click on the three dots add modules, and install the iOS build support here. I already have it, so I can create iOS apps with this Unity version. I have now opened the project. And first, let's look at the settings. I have them open here. If you need to find them again, go to Edit, Project Settings. And as before, go to the Player tab here, and now, select the iOS part, not the Android part. And there are many settings again. Most of them, we'll leave on the default settings for now. What we do set here is that Unity creates the Xcode project so that the application can be automatically signed by Xcode. This means we don't have to enter a profile or anything else. It all runs through Xcode. And I check down here. If the target device is set to iPhone and iPad, then you would develop for both device classes here. If that's not necessary, choose another one. And what's very important is that the target SDK is set to device SDK and not simulator. Because if you set it to simulator, the whole project or app won't run on a device, but only in a simulator. An Xcode simulator in this case. I don't want to change much here. Make sure you've given names and set the bundle identifier accordingly. So just maybe your name or the app's name. And then we can actually create the project or build the app by going to File, Build Settings, and here you need to check that the project is not set to Android, but to iOS. If that's not the case, then switch it here at the bottom with the button Switch Platform to the iOS platform. Once you've switched to the right platform, then you can simply click on Build. And it's best to create a new folder in the hierarchy called Builds. And in this Build folder, we can now create our project. I'll call it Test 1 again. Click Save. And now Unity will take a short moment to compile the iOS app and create the project, which we then need to open in Xcode and install from there on the iPad. When the build is complete, we get a folder Test 1 in our Builds folder. In which we find a file with the extension Xcode Roach. And that's what we need to open in Xcode. When that's done, we see here that the project has opened, showing that it's a Unity project. And now what we need to do is connect the iPad. I've done that here. You'll see at the top. You can select a device if you have connected an iPad. You also need to ensure that the developer mode is enabled on the iPad as it is on the Android phone. Then you can develop for the iPhone accordingly. Essentially, you can then also click on this folder above the iPhone and see here the settings for the app. This is now similar to what is in the Unity settings. And here we can check again that under capabilities, you have enabled that the certificate is signed. And here you need to select your developer account. I'll choose Christoph Holtman here and set it so that the app can also run on the device. Then we need to enable it for your developer account, because it can't yet come through the store and be certified accordingly. But this setting here allows us to run the app on the device. What we need to do now is click the play button up here, unlock the iPhone or iPad, and then wait for the project or app to be compiled and installed on the iPad. When that's done, the project or app should be installed on the iPad. Then I'll briefly show how to unlock it so it can be started. I need to enter my password here. To grant permission to develop with my developer account for Apple here. Once the build is complete, I get a warning here that I can't run the application on the device yet. I confirm this, it's not a big deal. Here, you can see my iPad screen, and here at the top is the installed smartphone application. And if I now try to start this app on the iPad, I get a message that as a developer, I don't have the permission to run this application. So we need to allow my developer account on the iPad to be trusted so that the app can be executed. And for that, we close this window and go to Settings, under General, and find Device Management and the Apple Developer account here. And here, click on the blue text and say that we trust this developer. And now, if you install more applications, it's not a problem, unless you uninstall all the applications you created. Then it resets. But if we now run our app, it works. And we see the cube rotating around our sphere. Essentially, we are at the end of the video. In this video, we covered how to install an Android and iOS app, or compile them first and then get them running on the device. I hope this video was helpful for you, and I look forward to next time. Until the next video.